Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I'm going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e. We're going to talk about a specific adventure, and this is a player's guide to the Curse of Strahd. That means if you're playing in the Curse of Strahd, you can stick around because there will not be spoilers in this. This is a very general approach to how to play the Curse of Strahd and prepare you before you go and have a chat with your dungeon master, whoever's running your game. Now, if you're a dungeon master, you might also find this video useful for you because it does spell out some of the major things that a player really needs to be warned of and be aware of when they're playing the game. Because the Curse of Strahd is a very good adventure, but it's not your standard Dungeons & Dragons. And I want to make that clear. When it comes to this being a player's guide to the Curse of Strahd, you might hear a few things that talk about the Curse of Strahd seeming like it's in the negative. But what I'm trying to explain to people is that the Curse of Strahd is not vanilla Dungeons & Dragons. It's not standard Dungeons & Dragons. That means that there is a chance you might find that some players will not find this adventure fun or entertaining, or even something they want to be involved with. And there are a lot of different reasons why that might take place. And I'm going to talk about each one of them very briefly, but hopefully enough detail to give you an idea of what's going on. The first thing is that the adventure is a sandbox. That means you can pretty much go anywhere. You have plenty of options as a player. You will likely be directed and clues dropped by your dungeon master, but you are driving the train, okay? You can go left, right, backward, forward. There are some limitations within the adventure in terms of borders, which you will find out about later on, but it is a sandbox, which means it is entirely possible you could wind up in a location which you're not ready for, and I'm going to talk more about that later. There are lots of horror themes. This is a horror adventure. Okay, that means it's going to be full of twists and turns and surprises and unexpected events and unexpected characters. All of those things make this quite a rich adventure, but need to be warned, there are definitely horror themes. So if you're not the sort of person who likes horror, you may find this more difficult, but yes, definitely going to be horror themes. And your dungeon master is going to be trying to figure out how to scare you in some way. Most of the combat counters are all right, but something to bear in mind is that the combat encounters are not necessarily fair and balanced, so be warned. Now, the reason being is that you go into a certain location, and some locations will have like a major villain or a major antagonist, and somebody that you have to either negotiate with or deceive, or you might have to actually fight them. There are lots of different options in the adventure. You don't have to necessarily get involved in combat, but it's entirely possible, even as you progress from levels 1 right through to about level 10, you will find some encounters you simply have no chance of winning, or surviving, should I say. And that's one of the things you need to bear in mind, is not fair and balanced. Now, To be honest, I know a lot of people think that's a bad thing, but you've got to remember that the Curse of Strahd is based on the original Ravenloft adventure, and that was built under a different perception of Dungeons & Dragons. The view was not that you were playing a video game where you should always be able to win. Instead, the idea was that in some cases you might have to do something unspeakable, like running away is necessary sometimes. Absolutely, sometimes you should definitely run away. And you might come across a few occasions where you can't run away, and it would have been the better choice to avoid the conflict completely if that was possible to do. Now, I know it sounds like I'm talking about the Curse of Strahd as being a horrible adventure. The reason that Ravenloft and the Curse of Strahd has got such a good reputation is because of these very elements. It gives you lots of choice, but it presents lots of risk as well. So just why I'm pointing those out. The adventure is lethal. It will kill characters unless your dungeon master makes a very distinct effort to make encounters or situations easier, or to adjust the encounters. During my own game, I had many character deaths take place, and therefore it's very important that you have a discussion with your Dungeon Master with regard to character death, which is my next point. Make sure your Dungeon Master discusses in your Session 0. Your Session 0 is what happens before you start playing. This is when you're making your character. You should be making your character with a group, not alone, away from everybody else, so that you can build a character that will work with everybody else. But you need to make sure you have a discussion and the Dungeon Master talks about character death and how they will manage character death, because that will impact the game quite a lot. And because it's entirely possible to have a lot of character death take place in this particular adventure, it's something that will crop up often. Now, for those of you who think that character death is the absolute worst thing that can happen in your Dungeons and Dragons game, I can assure you it is not. There are much worse outcomes for your character than character death. There are all sorts of horrible things. And I'm talking about curses and other events and activities that can take place. I don't want to give away too much, but I assure you that the worst thing that can happen to your character is not death. There are other things, and I think your Dungeon Master may well, if they are inclined, they might use a thing called dark gifts. I'm not going to say any more than that, but it's essentially like a curse of some kind, which I've just mentioned, okay? So just bear those in mind, because they can crop up, particularly if you're have a Dungeon Master who likes to sort of shake things up, because they will certainly shake up the adventure. If you are new to Dungeons and Dragons, this is a rough first adventure to play. I always recommend that new Dungeons and Dragons players play through The Lost Mine of Phandelver or some other adventure other than something like The Curse of Strahd. And I've often talked with Dungeon Masters about their desire to run their first adventure being The Curse of Strahd. And I've tried to warn them off from doing that, because there are a lot of different factors taking place in an adventure like this, and it assumes that you are not dealing with new players because of the very nature. Everything that can possibly happen in a Dungeons and Dragons game is likely to happen in The Curse of Strahd. Every eventuality that could ever pop up is likely to occur in this adventure. That's why I say it's not really a great adventure for new players, or even for a new Dungeon Master to run. So if you have a Dungeon Master and this is their first outing and they're running The Curse of Strahd, you need to give them a break, because there's a lot of complexity. It's actually quite a difficult adventure to run, and it will bring up a whole lot of factors and issues that they're not likely to have figured out how to solve straight away. So that's why I don't encourage new players to run through this game. Make sure your character, when you build your character, which you should be doing with the rest of the group, don't do it alone in a room on a computer with nobody else around. Make sure you're with the group when you do this. Make sure it has a strong link with the rest of the party members. It's not good enough to, we met in a tavern and we had a few beers and that was it, and we sort of got to know each other that way. You really need a really strong connection. And one of the things about Dungeons and Dragons is it's a cooperative game, right? That means that teamwork is vital. Absolutely vital in this adventure. So teamwork is vital for your success and to also stop inter-party conflict between your characters, but also between the players. I've found that what tends to happen in a game like this, in The Curse of Strahd, is it can bring up a whole lot of animosity between players if they're not careful, because they don't fully understand what's taking place. There may be many occasions where your Dungeon Master has given a secret message to another player to roleplay their character a particular way, because maybe they're infected with a disease or a curse, or there's something else going on. The Curse of Strahd is very much a horror-themed adventure, which means things like the undead and vampires. So there's all sorts of things that could be taking place. So teamwork vital for success between your players and the characters. Otherwise, it's going to spell doom. And if you aren't used to working as a team, you're going to have to figure it out really fast. Okay, there's lots of things that can go wrong. Do not split the party. And this is one of those adventures where if you show your weakness, there's somebody watching who will pick up on it. And therefore, it can be exploited. And your dungeon master will be looking for those moments when you make that foolish attempt to go off on your own. Now, when you watch a horror movie, right, and you see the young woman or whoever it is, a little boy or a man, and they go off away from the party to go and explore something, you always know that something bad's going to happen to them, right? Same sort of thing with the Curse of Strahd. Same sort of principle, so don't split up. Your dungeon master is going to be trying to turn your character to the dark side. No, we're not playing Star Wars, but it's essentially what's taking place. Their goal is not so much to test you and challenge you, but to see if they can twist your character from their good alignment or their neutral alignment and make you a villain. So be wary of that. It's important to make sure that when you build a character that it has strong connections of some kind, so they don't wind up making decisions that will take them down a dark route. Now, if you're dealing with players in your group who are used to playing like a murder hobo, that's going to go really badly for them. The chances are that the dungeon master will drop a carrot or some breadcrumbs. They'll follow those and they'll get themselves into a lot of trouble and wind up potentially being the main villain's lackey. That's entirely possible. So remember, they're trying to turn your character to the dark side. The adventure can take about 1 year to play through if you play every week for, say, 2 or 3 hours, particularly if you go and explore every single location, and provided that you don't also have too many problems along the way. If you have a lot of sort of character death or maybe some total party kills, that's where every character in the party dies during a combat encounter or whatever encounter it might be, then yeah. So think about things like traps. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is often full of traps. Traps and situations which might be really, really bad for you. Okay? Alright, so about a year. There are many twists. Lots of twists. It's a twisted web to untangle. Now, I wouldn't normally say to a player with regard to the Curse of Strahd that you need to keep a notebook of all the things that take place, because I did find that this is one adventure where taking notes is not necessarily absolutely vital. I will say this though, the players at my table who did take notes had a far better idea of what was going on, and I honestly think were more successful and better at driving the story in a positive way towards an outcome that they wanted. So it doesn't hurt to keep a notebook, particularly of the name of NPCs as you are going, just so that you've got some way of discerning what's going on, I mean, who you can trust, who you can't trust. It can be difficult at times to figure out who is the villain and who is a friend or a potential ally. And everybody quite possibly will present themselves as a potential ally, and it will be up to you and your character and how you roleplay them to decide who is the villain and who is the ally or friend. Which is why that notebook is quite useful, provided you actually use one. And you know, you can use your phone. You don't need to necessarily use a pencil and paper. There are lots of ways of taking notes if you want to. Your dungeon master is likely to use fewer combats, and the reason for doing that is not so that it takes away from your fun if you enjoy combat. It's to make the adventure creepier and scarier. Now, the idea behind this is, if you've ever watched the movie Jaws, Jaws is a very frightening movie, and the reason it's so frightening is we don't see the shark. We see the shark much later on, and your Dungeon Master will likely be doing something very similar. Old style horror movies did the same thing. New modern horror movies don't do that sort of thing. They just like to throw everything in your face, and they go for the jump scare. Now, jump scares aren't very scary. They're just sort of like a surprise, rather than being truly scary and frightening. So be wary that you might find that it takes a little while before you get from one combat encounter to the next one. So just be patient. Don't push it. As I said, there'll be a few occasions where you don't want to be engaged in combat at all, if you can help it. Make sure your adventuring gear is nice and broad and varied. Try to take as much stuff as you can that you think will be useful in the adventure. I recommend grabbing tools that are useful for dealing with undead creatures, because it's a horror, which means undead. Okay, there's going to be plenty of them. So make sure to stock up on all the things you can use against undead. Holy water is a good idea, but even a torch, a normal torch that you can light, would be useful. And also, take some stakes along, some wooden stakes. You can use them for holding down that tent, but you can also use them for shoving into somebody's heart. You know the kind of creature I'm talking about, right? That's that vampire, right? Spell selection is important. You are advised to take damage-dealing spells and utility spells. Cover all of your bases. Don't specialize in one area. That will actually just create problems for you. And there's no reason why you can't select spells that are, particularly when it comes to damage dealing, that are a bit more focused on undead, since you're likely to be dealing with a lot of that already. Now, if your Dungeon Master doesn't give you a heads up about the adventure you're playing, none of this advice is going to be very useful to you. But hopefully they are giving you at least some idea of what you're going to be playing in. This is an adventure that I would say is more suitable for experienced and skilled players. And experienced and skilled players probably don't need this advice. They will probably already know all of the things I've pointed out. But if you are sort of an intermediate player, not necessarily a beginner, then you might find some of this general advice useful in some way. So that means you need to use good tactics, you need to think things through, you need to make good decisions, don't go half-cocked, don't go and do things that are too impulsive. By building an impulsive character, the only thing you're going to achieve is disaster and probably character death. Those are the sorts of characters that would not survive in this adventure, okay? Particularly those who rush in and don't think about what they're doing. If you don't like horror movies, if you don't like horror stories or horror books, if you don't like horror adventures, this is not the story for you. Go and play something else, okay? I had one player who started playing in The Curse of Strahd, and out of the whole group, and there were 7 of them, one player said, I want to stop playing. This is not the adventure I really want to be involved in. It's not the style of play that I enjoy. And it's totally all right. If you do not like the idea of being in a horror adventure, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So don't get worried that other people will think badly of you. It's not for everybody. And even as a Dungeon Master, I would not run The Curse of Strahd again, just because I felt quite bad for some of the players when they were playing through, because of some of the things they had to deal with. There are a lot of moral dilemmas in this adventure, things where there doesn't seem to be a choice you can make that's good, where each choice seems to have a bad result. You will be up against the greatest Dungeons and Dragons villain ever created. Strahd is by far the greatest villain that Dungeons and Dragons has, which means he's cunning and clever, and therefore you'll need to have your wits about you. I would say the last thing I want to just quickly say that's really important, and that is, I want you to remember that your Dungeon Master is still your friend and still on your side when it's all over. It may not feel like that during the gameplay or at the end of the campaign, but sometimes it's very easy to forget particularly the sorts of things your character will go through, that they are still a friend to you and on your side, just because of the nature of the adventure. Okay, they would have to change so much to tame it down, and it's not that sort of adventure. It's not the sort of adventure that you go and tinker with too much and cool things down. It is designed to be horrific in some nature. It's a horror story. Be prepared for the unexpected. Be prepared to be disgusted and surprised and frightened. Make sure at the end of it that some of the images, if you are finding it difficult, I know that a lot of the players who played at my table, after about 2 or 3 hours, they were quite exhausted because of the tension the adventure builds up in them. So if you get tired, let your dungeon master know. Go have a break, go to the toilet, have a drink, have a rest, have a chat with everybody, and then whenever you're all ready to go back and play again, then go and play again. You might even want to have a talk with your dungeon master about playing for a shorter period of time, just because of the level of fatigue you will suffer while you're playing through the adventure. And I know you might be thinking that sounds ridiculous and I don't believe you, but honestly, it is a fatiguing adventure. It will take a lot out of you. Now, I'm hoping you have found this useful in some way, and if you have, that's great news. I actually have plenty of videos for players if you are interested on how to play the game, tactical advice, how to use adventuring gear, stuff like that you should find useful. If you're a dungeon master, I have a series of videos on the Curse of Strahd, which you might also find useful. Now, if you want to support the channel so I keep making videos like this, I have a Patreon page where you get access to the unlisted live streams, additional content, and priority on the videos I make. I also have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon down in the description, or doobly-doo. I have a merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.